Our second reading today is from the Gospel according to John, chapter 11, verses 1 to 45. Sorry, it's another long one, like the woman at the well. But you have to have the whole story. Now, a certain man was ill, Lazarus, of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair, and her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to his disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble because they see the light of the world. But those who walk at night stumble because the light is not in them. After saying this, he told them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right. Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death. They thought he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. For your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, the teacher is here and is calling for you. And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, unbind him and let him go. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. And may God speak to us through these verses today. You know, it has been pointed out that in John's gospel, Jesus' ministry begins at a wedding and ends at a funeral. The wedding was the wedding at Cana, where he turned water into wine, and the funeral is here with his friend Lazarus. It is the last sign that he performs before entering Jerusalem for the last time. Lazarus and his sisters, Mary and Martha, lived in a town called Bethany. They were good friends of Jesus. We don't really know how they became such close friends, although in Luke's gospel, Jesus does visit the home of Martha and Mary. No mention is made of Lazarus until now, and the two sisters send word to Jesus that the brother is very ill. The one you love is sick. Obviously, they had a close relationship. These women felt that the relationship was close enough that they could ask Jesus for his help and believe that he would help them. Now, because of this message, some writers have speculated that Lazarus may be the one mentioned 4 times in John's Gospel as the mysterious disciple whom Jesus loved, present at the Last Supper, the crucifixion, and resurrection appearances. Who's to say? You know, but if we remember that Jesus is a wandering preacher with no home of his own, we would know that the kindness of people like Lazarus and Mary and Martha was very important to him and was surely very welcome to him. We can guess that this little family saw something in Jesus. They experienced something in his words and deeds that made them believe in him. They also took some risk doing this because Jesus had a lot of enemies and they were always plotting and scheming against him. So now Jesus hears that Lazarus is seriously ill. After 2 days, he goes to them in Bethany. Now, we don't really know why he waited those 2 days. He says it's to prove the glory of God to them, to his disciples. But his disciples don't think it's a very good idea at all because Jesus does have his enemies there. They're afraid he'll be killed. And Thomas is the only disciple who seems willing to take the chance. And he even says, well, let us go die with him then, if that's what is to happen. That's the same Thomas who would later have doubts about Jesus' resurrection, known as Doubting Thomas to this day. But here Thomas seems rather brave, if maybe a little reckless. Now, as they travel, Jesus tells them that Lazarus has died, but they are going anyway because this will be an opportunity to show the power of God. One writer says, it is in God's nature to pull us out where the big questions get asked, to where we are forced to deal with intense feelings like fear and loss and panic. And there may be no bigger question for us than the question of death. And it is when we are confronted by death, whether it's our own or of someone close to us, at such moments our feelings may be at our most intense. From the perspective of faith, what are the possibilities then that can be opened up by this fear, this sense of loss? What are the spiritual possibilities, asks one writer, that might arise when we are broken open by our grief, by our fear, by our anger? Mary and Martha are experiencing those feelings. They are grief-stricken. They're even a little angry. They're upset with Jesus even. Because when Jesus finally arrives, they tell him more than once, you know, if you'd been here, this wouldn't have happened. Those are strong emotions. They love Jesus. They trust him. But he seems to have let them down. Can we relate to that? Can we relate to those emotions? Have we been in similar situations when our faith in Jesus seems to let us down, when our prayers are not answered, when something terrible has happened because our grief or our fear is so overwhelming to us? You know how easy it is to be people of faith when life is going smoothly. But if our faith is not something we can hold on to when life gets hard, now we may notice that even after these sisters are upset with Jesus for not being there when they needed him, they still confess their trust in him. They still believe in the power of God to make a difference in their lives. And Jesus tells them their brother Lazarus will rise again, and that whoever believes in him will truly live and never die. Now, Martha is not exactly sure what he means by that, but Jesus is reassuring her that even though our physical body will die, we ourselves, our spiritual selves, never die. And to illustrate this in a very dramatic way, Jesus asked to be taken to Lazarus' tomb. When he sees the grief and tears of these family and friends, he is also grieved. He starts to cry. He's filled with compassion and sorrow for these people that he loves. And you know, it's a reminder that in such situations, sometimes that is all we can do. And it's all we should do, to grieve with others, to cry with them. You know, many times when we are in the presence of people in pain or sorrow, we sometimes have this compulsion to say something, to do something. We might imagine it is our responsibility to try to take that grief away, to make everything better. And often we wind up giving them empty promises or false assurances. We may also wind up making them think they don't have a right to those feelings, that it's somehow wrong or faithless to have those kind of feelings. And then they feel guilty for having them. The truth is, sometimes we just need people to do nothing more than grieve with us, to cry with us, to share our pain so we don't have to go through it alone. And so here we see for a moment that is exactly what Jesus does. Someone once said, and I couldn't agree more, that the greatest insight of our faith is not the belief that Jesus is like God, but rather that God is like Jesus. He reveals the heart of God that breaks when our hearts are broken. It is a heart that shares in our suffering, a heart that comes to us with compassion. There at the tomb, Jesus orders the stone rolled away from the entrance. Martha is concerned about the condition of the body after so long. Lazarus has been in there for 4 days. I read somewhere that back then people believed that when someone dies, their spirit, the life force, kind of lingers around at the grave for a few days. So the mention of 4 days may be made to make sure everyone knows Lazarus is really dead. But Jesus tells Martha, didn't I say you would see God's glory if you trust me? And then he praises God to let everyone know that everything he does is not by his own power, but by the power of God, and to convince everyone that God sent him, that he is indeed God's Messiah. And then he shouts, Lazarus, come out. And Lazarus steps out of the tomb, still wrapped in his grave clothes, but alive. And so Jesus tells the mourners, unbind him, take off those grave clothes, and let him go. Now, on the surface, this is a story about a man who was dead who now walks out of his tomb alive. And if we want to, we can take it as a miracle story and just leave it there at that. But as one writer suggests, on another level, Jesus was not there simply to make a miracle. He was there to offer people an opportunity to think differently about life and death. He was there to challenge their old ways of facing death so that they could begin to have a new way of facing life. Because if death has no hold on us anymore, we are free to truly live. Yes, Jesus wept at the death of his friend Lazarus. He wept at the sorrow of the family and friends. But maybe he also wept at the hold that death still had on them. He wept because he saw them trapped in their grief and their fear. He himself would soon be facing his own death. But Jesus faced death as something, as someone said, to be conquered. Something that should not have ultimate power over us. The story of Lazarus then becomes a kind of foreshadowing, a kind of dress rehearsal for the story of Jesus' own resurrection. Because in Jesus' resurrection, we see that death does not win over us. As I said, we can leave this a miracle story about a dead man walking out of a tomb. But that can leave us wondering why such things, why don't they happen anymore? Why don't they happen in our own lives? And that can lead to disappointment. It can lead to doubt. Or we might ask ourselves, which is the greater miracle, the more significant miracle? Working some dramatic change in the physical laws of nature, or working a dramatic change in human hearts? When you get down to it, the real point of any of Jesus' miracles is to make a change in us. So this is not just a story about Lazarus. It is not really about Mary and Martha and their mourning friends. It is about you and me. It is about all of us. It is about Jesus calling all of us out of our tombs of grief, of fear, our dead lives. Come out of those tombs, he calls to us. Take off those grave clothes, those symbols of death. Come out and live the full, abundant life. Be unbound and set free. Amen.